Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, all hell breaks loose in Kenya's parliament after a baby is brought into the house. The deputy speaker kicks out the female lawmaker at the centre of the hysterical response from some of her male colleagues. The incident sparks debate about gender equality in workplaces in the country. Also, the clock is ticking for would-be presidential candidates in Tunisia. They're racing to submit their bids ahead of the cut-off date. That was moved up after elections were rescheduled following the death of Beji Caid Essebsi last month. And members of the Islamic Movement of Nigeria, a Shia group, have welcomed the release this week of their leader. Ibrahim Zakzaki was granted permission to head to India for medical treatment after years in detention took their toll on his health. We take a closer look at their allegations of persecution from authorities. But first, a Kenyan MP went into meltdown on Wednesday after one of his colleagues had to bring her baby into work because of an emergency. Take a look.
All of us have children. Speaker, all of us have children. So, Speaker, this house, there is a stranger. And it has never happened since 1963. Mr. Speaker, this is an abuse of the house. And that member must be cited for gross misconduct. Mr. Speaker, it must be cited. We must protect the dignity of the house.
So the focus of that pretty hysterical response from Aden Dwele and others was Zuleka Hussein. She took her 5-month-old daughter with her into chambers after childcare fell through. She was later kicked out after members applied a rule banning strangers to her baby. Some female members of parliament also left in solidarity, and some male MPs spoke up in her defence, saying that the reaction was disproportionate. Nanjala Nyabola joins us now with more. Nanjala, so that was a pretty intense reaction to the presence of a child in parliament. What's your takeaway from what happened on Wednesday morning?
To me, I think it really speaks to the hostility that this particular parliament, this particular administration has shown towards women in general and women in the legislature specifically. This isn't the first incident that has been brought up by Honorable Duale. A few weeks ago, he commented on another female MP bringing in her backpack. She has a back problem, so she couldn't carry a handbag. And the parliamentary rules allow women to go into parliament with a handbag. And he took time out of the debate in question in order to point out that his colleague had a backpack in the office, framing it as if it was some kind of gross misconduct on the part of the colleague, but it was really just a question of necessity, much as is the case here. The childcare fell through and someone needed to watch the baby. I think it really speaks to a broader hostility that this particular parliament has towards women legislators, which manifests in various ways, including trying to get the women who do make it into the parliament to conform to really absurd standards of behavior, but also extending to the inability to pass laws that make it possible for more women to be in parliament so that we can have effective rules that recognize that, this kind of thing is going to come up.
Why do you think it sent everyone into such an uproar? I mean, it really was quite spectacular.
I really do think that, outside Parliament for us, it's really a manifestation, again, of, the hostility that there exists towards women in the public sphere in Kenya at the moment. It's feeding into a broader frustration that's coming up after years and years of gains, in business, in politics, in media, in other spheres. We're seeing a lot of retraction in the presence of women, in the place of women in public life in Kenya. And I think outside Parliament, people were just really reminded and triggered, really, of all of the other things that are happening in the broader public sphere. In terms of the reaction of the men parliamentarians, I really do think it is part of a broader hostility against women in the legislature. Kenya has laws in place that were created by the 2010 Constitution, for example, that required that no more than 2/3 of parliament should be made up of one gender. We haven't met that threshold. In fact, election after election over the last 2 elections, the number of women elected to parliament is actually decreasing. And that is, a failure constitutionally. There are many experts who argue that the current parliament is unconstitutional because it doesn't meet that threshold. And we're seeing, instead of there being this push to meet that threshold, we're seeing more and more resistance, which is going to keep manifesting in all of these ways.
Do you think that Kenya has made much progress when it comes to gender equality in the workplace over the years, despite whatever the shortcomings are today? Surely there must have been some positive changes that we've seen over the last decade or so.
You know, it's a 2 steps forward, 2 steps back situation. It's important to recall that prior to colonization, you know, Kenyan women worked. Kenyan women took their children to work. They would wrap them in a blanket and throw the blanket on their back and go to the farm and go, you know, take care of animals. So the presence of women in the workplace really isn't unusual in the way that it would be in countries where you had explicit prohibitions on, you know, women working outside the home. What is unusual is this layer of class issues, is that, you know, with the formal official workplace, women are meeting a lot of resistance to continuing some of the practices that their mothers and their grandmothers were able to do. We've seen most of the small businesses in Kenya are owned by women. We've seen an increase in representation of women. More women are graduating from universities, gaining PhDs, being able to be in public. But we're seeing an incredible amount of resistance in the legislature, in parliament. What we have in Kenya is a really thick glass ceiling, and women are still struggling to move past that.
Thank you very much, Nanjala Nyabola, there for us in Nairobi. Well, Rwanda and DR Congo have agreed to clamp down on cross-border travel as they try and contain the spread of an Ebola epidemic that's claimed around 1,800 lives over the last year in eastern DRC. People moving between the two countries for non-essential reasons will now need clearance from both governments. 3 people were killed in a suicide attack in northeastern Nigeria. 2 women are believed to be behind the blast that went off in the town of Mafa, not far from Maiduguri, on Tuesday evening. Boko Haram extremists are suspected of having orchestrated the explosion. Now, members of the Islamic Movement of Nigeria, a Shia group, have welcomed the release this week of their leader, Ibrahim Zakzaki. He was granted permission to head to India for medical treatment. He was arrested in 2015, and his followers have long accused authorities of persecution. Last week, the IMN was listed as a terrorist organization, and rights groups say that hundreds of its members have been killed by security forces over the last few years.
Abdurrahman Abubakar is a loyal member of the Islamic Movement of Nigeria. He's leading the appeal on behalf of the Shia organization after a court granted the government permission to label them a terrorist organization and ban them. At the Abuja High Court, the group's lawyers are challenging the ban. The IMN is Nigeria's biggest Shiite organization and accuses authorities of persecution.
The government is trying to bury the atrocities committed in 2015 and previous atrocities that were committed on the members or the disciples of Sheikh Ibrahim Zakzaki.
Authorities accuse the IMN of trying to create an Islamic republic and failing to respect the Nigerian constitution. The National Police say the IMN's paramilitary militia must be dissolved and security forces have been ordered to break up any IMN rallies or meetings.
Anywhere we see them, we will proceed against them in accordance with the terror laws of this country. But I want to make it very clear that it is not every Shiite Muslim in Nigeria or every Shiite group that is proscribed.
Since 2014, these young people have been taking part in IMN street rallies. They've been on the front lines of protests to defend the group. They come from a family of Shia Muslims, and despite the ban, all 3 refuse to give up the movement.
There is no day that will become terrorists in this country. We are the lovers of this country. We, the Zakzaki followers, we are the lovers of these countries. We really love this country, and we don't want anything bad to happen in this country.
The police have promised to dismantle the group, and authorities fear the organisation could resort to radical violence.
Tunisian hopefuls have been submitting their candidacy for upcoming presidential elections. The date for the final cut-off point for that has been moved up to the 9th after the date for the election itself was changed following the death of Beji Caid Essebsi last month. Our correspondents report.
In Tunis, some presidential candidates were ready to run for election on day 1, coming to drop off their documents to EZ, the High Independent Election Commission. Nabil Karoui is a businessman and TV mogul who recently launched his party. His candidacy is controversial because he is currently under investigation for corruption, and a last-minute election law amendment nearly disqualified him.
Today I'm very happy. Democracy's prevailed, and Tunisians will be able to choose who to vote for.
Today, EZ has to manage the candidacies of all parties. There's an element of political strategy to the date when a candidate submits their documents because it corresponds to where their name will appear on the voting ballot.
It's first come, first served. Whoever arrives first will have their name first, and whoever arrives last will have their name last on the ballot paper. That's important for the political parties, but also for the independent candidates, who could have a privileged spot on the voting ballots.
Meanwhile, the most difficult thing is to meet the criteria to present oneself, especially for the small candidates. Hamoud Mansour, former justice minister and independent candidate, works day and night with his team to collect signatures from voters. He needs 10,000 for his candidacy to be accepted according to the nomination rules.
We are a small organization made up only of volunteers with young people and retired people. For the moment, we are collecting signatures in Tunis, and we have some arriving from other regions.
A few days before the final deadline, his team still roams the streets of Tunis in search of sponsors. Already, several independent candidates and party leaders alike have presented themselves. The Prime Minister, Youssef Chahid, is expected to submit his candidacy on the last day, but it's not yet official.
Well, that's a Fire in Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.